Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here to discuss this very important topic. I am a non-resident associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and that's the umbrella that I'm here under, but I'm also the founder and CEO of my own consulting company, as well as being back in the Pentagon as a special government employee for the current administration, which is where I retired out of the Office of the Secretary of Defense. So I'm very pleased to be here today to discuss this very important topic. Thank you to the National Institute for Defense Studies for the kind invitation to speak to you today. Okay. The United States, along with many of its closest allies and partners, namely the European Union, Japan, and Australia, have recently developed national industrial strategies. There are many similarities and common themes within these strategies. These include the response to geopolitical urgency, technological focus, supply chain resilience, alliance integration. But there are also some key differences between the strategies, such as scale and reach, historical political constraints, self-sufficiency versus interdependence. So I will discuss these more in detail during my presentation. For the US, the National Defense Industrial Strategy, the main focuses are resilient supply chains, workforce readiness, flexible acquisition, which is embodied by the new acquisition transformation that was recently established, and economic deterrence. For resilient supply chains, there are multiple subcategories, including engaging with partners and allies to expand global defense production and increase supply chain resilience. The U.S. also likes to use the term production diplomacy, referring to multilateral collaboration lessons from the response in the wake of Russia's unprovoked aggression toward Ukraine. The U.S. led the international community to rally to Ukraine's defense, organizing recurring engagements of the heads of the ministries of defense and national armaments directors to coordinate support efforts. These engagements have jump-started initiatives to expand ammunition production, establish an international support fund, and organize the delivery and sustainment of critical capabilities to Ukraine. As Watanabe-san emphasized in his talk, there are opportunities to similarly convene the leadership of allied and partner nations within the Indo-Pacific and to deepen multinational collaboration on regional industrial base and manufacturing production challenges. Rather than wait for emergency circumstances, investing in these relationships now will yield fruit should we collectively face a crisis in the coming years. The U.S. must also strengthen international defense production relationships by working with allies and partners through both multilateral and bilateral agreements to boost defense production, innovation, and overall capacity and capability. Lastly, the U.S. needs to build production strengths via multiple international cooperation mechanisms by aggregating and amplifying demand signals for common munitions and weapon systems, minimizing customized solutions where appropriate, and standardizing exportability, investing in material solutions ahead of foreign demand, licensing production of U.S. systems, expanding foreign defense company production in the U.S., and placing an emphasis on interoperability, interchangeability, and material standardization. The defense industrial bases of these countries must be mutually reinforcing. Fundamentally, the United States views partner and ally collaboration in this way. It is important for the U.S. to have capability to produce its own weapons and platforms. However, the U.S. has never had and will never have a completely domestic industrial base. It can't and it shouldn't. For certain key critical capabilities, it's necessary for there to be domestic supply. But that's not the case for everything. And in fact, there are many situations where it is not the case. Even with the U.S. Department of War's demand, which is large compared to some other countries, it's still not enough to sustain even a single supplier for some capabilities. For example, chemical production for munitions. Most chemical manufacturing in the US cannot make a business case to produce the small quantities for some of the key materials DoD needs for its weapon systems. So it's helpful if we can find a supplier in an allied or partner nation that is producing for multiple customers so that the quantities make the business case sustainable. There also may be better technologies in partner and allied nations that would provide us with better capabilities for our warfighters. So we would be remiss in not taking advantage of that. It also may be advantageous from a logistics perspective to have production capability in or near theater. The U.S. just recently, in the past couple days actually, released the U.S. National Security Strategy, and it specifically says in there, we will also encourage the revitalization of industrial base of our allies and partners to strengthen collective defenses. There are four main ways for the U.S. to collaborate with partners and allies on manufacturing. Co-development or co-production, and examples there include the F-35, which is the exemplar. There's 8 countries providing parts and manufacturing. It was 9 before Turkey was removed. ESSM, Evolved Sea Sparrow Missile, is also a good example. There are 12 countries that form an international consortium to provide parts and manufacturing. And then SM-3 Block 2A is an example of the bilateral agreement between the US and Japan that co-developed and co-produced it. A third way is licensed production. So an example there would be the General Dynamics F-16 aircraft, which is produced under license in South Korea. The fourth way, is leveraging capability to mitigate U.S. issues and shortfalls. The U.S. imports, for instance, rayon and carbon fibers from Japan that are used in hypersonic missile glide bodies. However, the focus is oftentimes, but should not be solely, on co-development and co-production. Where there are fewer opportunities, it is the most difficult to execute, and sometimes it is the least helpful. For instance, it is much easier to get agreement on technology transfer for a material or a component than for an entire system. There are also many instances where other countries could use partner and allied material components to mitigate a shortfall within their industrial bases. Unfortunately, there are many barriers to partner and allied collaboration with the U.S., and it is a recognized issue. These include such things as export controls. ITAR is a prime example of that one, and other limits to technology transfer. The U.S. also tends to overclassify its documentation, defaulting to no foreign, which limits distribution. There can also be cultural or policy barriers within partner and allied nations. For instance, the EU Defense Industrial Strategy, which I'll talk more about in a minute, calls for increasing capability within the EU, potentially leading to less collaboration, while Japan revised its principles for the transfer of defense equipment and technology, potentially leading to increased collaboration. And planning and funding cycles between the various countries are very often unsynchronized, leading to difficulties in commitments and funding availability. There are many collaborative agreements that do exist, some more successfully than others, such as the NTIB, the National Technology and Industrial Base, which is an agreement between Australia, Canada, the UK, and the US, AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US, and the Quad, Australia, India, Japan, and the US. Lastly, we all need to be careful who we are partnering with. Countries that are partners and allies today may not be tomorrow. In the following slides, I'm going to give a brief summary of the defense industrial strategies for the EU, Japan, and Australia. For the EU, the main objective for the European Defense Industrial Strategy, which is non-binding, is to undergo a paradigm shift from emergency response to defense readiness. It is not just about financing, but also an industrial organization program. It also aims to ensure the European governments buy more European military kit and purchase armaments jointly to make spending more effective. The main themes of the EDIS are streamlining procurement, so harmonizing procurement procedures, making it easier to sell arms, like foreign military sales, more funding for joint procurement, so funding capabilities that would benefit more than one EU country, and keeping production high, through subsidies when demand is low, something the US does not do. The EU hopes to accomplish this by making changes in the European defense and technological industrial base to include making sure it is more closely integrated with the wider non-defense European technological and industrial base. This is very similar to the US's new acquisition transformation goals. It also aims to have less European dependencies on non-European sources for key defense technologies. The idea is not to create a fortress Europe, but to recognize the problem of accessing the US defense market and of establishing balanced technology exchange across the Atlantic. There is an understanding that it will be naturally necessary for Europeans to cooperate more closely to ensure the future of their own defense technology industrial base. Europe has retained a defense industrial base since the end of the Cold War, but it's not competitive enough, Commission official told reporters. It's there, but we're not able to produce on time and in volume. The European defense industry is undersized and struggles to cope with the sudden and considerable increase in equipment demand linked to the massive transfer of equipment and supplies to Ukraine, and the urgent need to replenish national stockpiles and inventories. Both of these attributes are similar within the United States defense industrial base. Japan's defense industrial strategy represents a major transformation, shifting from traditionally pacifist and domestically focused approach to a more robust, internationally collaborative, and technology advanced posture. Key components include strengthening the defense industrial base by providing financial support for companies to upgrade manufacturing, enhancing cybersecurity, and securing supply chain, and expanding international cooperation through alliances with the US and allies, participating in dialogues on joint operations and supply cooperation, export promotion, focusing on revitalizing defense exports, and revisions to principles on transfer of defense equipment and technology, and security assistance, providing defense equipment and infrastructure to like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Other key components are investing in new and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and unmanned systems, which was talked about in the previous presentation, workforce development, and overcoming historical challenges through addressing inefficiency and high costs that have plagued the Japanese defense industry, and reviving competitiveness by making the defense industry more competitive in the international market. For Australia, its defense industry development strategy establishes a framework and provides principles for a resilient and competitive sovereign defense industrial base to meet the nation's security requirements. Key initiatives include efforts such as reforms to procurement processes, shifting from managing project risk to managing strategic risk, and focusing on delivering minimal viable capabilities faster rather than pursuing perfect solutions, this is a very similar key strategy of the new US acquisition transformation effort, which I will discuss if there's sufficient time. In addition, the strategy includes workforce development and enhanced security for the defense industrial base. It also highlights the need for innovation, specifically accelerating the development and integration of innovative solutions and asymmetric technologies, as well as industry engagement, improving communication between the government and the defense industrial base. And lastly, international partnerships through close collaboration with trusted international partners through AUKUS Pillar 1, which is the nuclear-powered submarines effort, and Pillar 2, advanced capabilities, and building strategic and resilient supply chains. All four strategies share some common themes, which include response to geopolitical urgency. All the strategies are driven by a challenging security environment, which includes China's rise and Russia's actions and a sense of urgency. They all include a technological focus, universal prioritization of emerging and disruptive technologies like AI, unmanned systems, and hypersonics, supply chain resilience, a shared emphasis on securing supply chains through friendshoring and reducing reliance on adversarial nations, and alliance integrations, All four recognize the need for deeper integration of the defense industrial base with allies and partners, especially with the U.S. alliance network, to pool resources and enhance interoperability. There are also some key differences between the four strategies. Scale and reach is the first one. The U.S. has a global industrial base in reach, while Japan, the EU, and Australia have regional focuses and aspire to be more sovereign, but internationally linked capabilities. There are historical and political constraints within each country. Japan is emerging from decades of strict pacifist constraints on military spending and exports, which the others do not face to the same extent. The EU faces internal political and bureaucratic hurdles in harmonizing its members' defense industries. Self-sufficiency versus independence is another key difference. The US aims for supremacy and self-reliance, while Australia, Japan, and the EU acknowledge a greater degree of interdependence and rely heavily on partnerships for critical capabilities like nuclear submarines or next-generation fighters. If you look within the different focus areas within the four strategies, it's interesting to compare them with each other. Starting with the primary goal, the U.S. wants to maintain global military and technology superiority, supremacy, and support vast global posture, while Japan desires to fundamentally resource self-defense capabilities and secure supply chains. The EU wants to achieve strategic autonomy while complementing NATO and consolidate fragmented national industries. And Australia wishes to achieve deterrence by denial in its region, focusing on sovereign capabilities and regional resilience. When looking at the industrial bases of the four regions, the U.S. has a massive established defense industry, but faces challenges with production bottlenecks and acquisition flexibility. While Japan's defense industry has been traditionally niche, pacifist and domestically focused, and also faces profitability and export challenges. The EU defense industry is highly advanced, but fragmented across member states, and often hampered by national interests and bureaucracy. While Australia has a smaller defense industry that is dependent on imports and heavily reliant on key alliances for major capabilities. With regards to international cooperation, the U.S. is interested in friendshoring and deep integration with allies like AUKUS partners, like the AUKUS partners, and to share the burden with collective and resilient supply chains. Japan's international cooperation efforts are rapidly expanding, shifting from an isolation policy to joint development through efforts such as the Global Combat Air Program and the AUKUS Pillar 1 potential, as well as equipment transfers. The EU strives for internal collaboration, within the EU, but is often hindered by national politics, and it seeks to a balanced transatlantic partnership with the U.S., a more balanced. Central to Australia's strategy is leveraging partnerships to gain access to advanced technologies and to share costs through efforts such as AUKUS and the QLD cooperation with Japan and the U.S. The key focus for the four regions show some similarities and some differences. The U.S. is focused on AI, hypersonics, unmanned systems, cyber, and space, and emphasizes speed and scale of production, while Japan prioritizes counter-strike capabilities, integrated air and missile defense, and unmanned systems. The EU is developing common platforms, increasing R&D, and reducing reliance on non-EU suppliers, while Australia is interested in long-range strike, persistent awareness, and building infrastructure resilience. Lastly, with regards to export control and technology transfer, the U.S. has stringent controls like ITAR that can complicate allied cooperation, but there is a recent push to streamline processes for allies as a part of the U.S. new acquisition transformation. Japan has historically been very restrictive, but has enacted major reforms to allow the export of jointly developed systems like the GCAP fighter and licensed parts. EU is a complex system involving both EU and national level regulations, which can make things confusing and more difficult, but it aims to facilitate intra-EU trade. Australia has aligned itself with AUKUS partners to facilitate technology sharing and co-production. In conclusion, the leadership of all four regions have made increased industrial strength and resiliency a priority and have included international efforts as a key part of their strategies. While all 4 defense industrial strategies have their differences, which are many times rooted in past history and decision making, there are enough similarities to provide hope for increased international industrial collaboration and cooperation. As these regions are faced with increasingly strong adversaries, it is imperative that any industrial strategy, includes partners and allies. No one region or country can do this alone. Very quickly, since I do have a few minutes, I'm going to go through some information about the recent U.S. Acquisition transformation because I thought it might be of interest to this audience. So on April 9th, President Trump issued Executive Order 14265, which was titled Modernizing the Defense Acquisitions and Spurring Innovation in the Defense Industrial Base. On November 10th, of this year, Secretary of War Hegseth issued 3 memos designed to address the executive order. The first memo, which I highlight here, is about transforming the defense acquisition system into the warfighting acquisition system. It establishes the new warfighting acquisition system to replace the defense acquisition system. The second memo, reforming the joint requirements process, focused on streamlining how requirements are set to accelerate capability and delivery. And the third memo, unifying the department's arms transfer and security cooperation, aims to improve efficiency in how the department handles arms transfers. The key components of the first memo are delivering warfighter capabilities at speed and scale, by empowering acquisition leaders and holding them accountable by aggressively streamlining bureaucracy such as policies, processes, review, and documents. I applaud this approach. It is actually a more comprehensive approach than previous acquisition reform efforts. It's being done as a holistic type of effort. Rebuilding the defense industrial base to harness America's entrepreneurs by lowering barriers to entry, securing longer and better deals with industry through competition, and aligning private capital with the DoW to make strategic investments. And lastly, transforming the culture of the workforce and industry to a wartime footing by pivoting from compliance with regulations to maximizing mission outcomes. As Secretary Hegseth noted, for those businesses that are on board, it is a great growth opportunity, but for those not willing to assume risk, he wishes them well. The key components of the second memo are a major overhaul of the process to determine and prioritize joint requirements with the goal to accelerate delivery of new technology and capabilities. Military services versus the Office of the Secretary of War and the Joint Staff now have responsibility for their requirements and determinations and ensuring they align within this new structure. It establishes the Requirements and Resourcing Alignment Board, co-chaired by the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Deputy Secretary of War, and to serve as a single decision forum for aligning fiscal resources to joint operational problems. The Undersecretary of War for Acquisition and Sustainment and for Research and Engineering are going to establish a mission engineering integration activity to more closely align those two offices and the function of mission engineering. And then the Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, or CAPE, offices within the Office of the Secretary of War will establish and maintain a joint acceleration reserve designed to fund innovative technology insertion and bridge the valley of death. Lastly, the key components of the third memo, and the one most relevant to this symposium, are improving efficiency and effectiveness for how the department handles arms transfer and security cooperation activities. Also improving the FMS process by streamlining processes for requests and deliveries and increasing the use of design for exportability. It aims to reinstate the 2018 conventional arms transfer policy to reduce regulatory barriers and increase transparency, reduce the scope of items requiring government-to-government sales to increase direct commercial sales opportunities, and to realign the Defense Security Cooperation Agency and the Defense Technology Security Administration from the Undersecretary of War for Policy, who will still provide strategic direction, to the Undersecretary of War for Acquisition and Sustainment, who will be responsible for execution and delivery. Together, these three memos and accompanying implementation efforts represent drastic changes within the department's acquisition enterprise. But there are multiple potential barriers to implementing this new transformation, some of which are congressional approval will be required for some of the policy and fiscal changes. They are not going to be automatic. This is a different mindset for the Department of War and for industry. The Secretary expects everyone to be acting as if they're on a wartime footing. There's traditionally a cultural resistance to change, and this will be no different. Changes in the way the Department of War expects industry to behave. This is probably one of the biggest changes. Less government investment, more self-investment. And educating the workforce. These are drastic changes that are long-lasting processes and procedures. I thank you for your time and attention.